Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into that huge $1.3 trillion stimulus bill they just approved. You know, the one big beautiful one.
That's the one. And we're specifically looking at Simon Dixon's take from BitcoinHardTalk. He had some strong words for it.
He called it a war and surveillance budget, right?
Yeah.
So our mission today is to unpack that. We want to connect his analysis to Bitcoin, the wider economy, geopolitics.
Basically give you a shortcut to understanding how these things might be linked, according to Dixon.
Let's dive in. So this $1.3 trillion, Dixon says it's not really about fiscal conservatism.
Not at all. He actually frames it as a proof of weapons stimulus. His argument is that it's really a mechanism for, well, wealth transfer.
Wealth transfer and consolidating power.
Yeah, basically using public money, or debt rather, to boost specific industries. Think defense contractors, surveillance firms.
And this adds, what, over $3 trillion to the deficit?
Yeah.
Raises the debt ceiling by $5 trillion?
That's right. And Dixon really flags the spending on what he calls war, defense, and surveillance. So immigration enforcement tech, companies like Palantir.
He sees that as crony capitalism.
Pretty much. Funded by debt. And he argues that debt ultimately fuels inflation for, regular people.
Okay. And he ties this into other recent events, too, like President Trump's comments on Musk and Powell.
He does. Dixon calls that a kind of destabilization campaign. The idea, or at least Dixon's interpretation, is that it's meant to deliberately weaken faith in the U.S. dollar.
To what end?
To potentially help pave the way for a more multipolar world order, where maybe different interests can gain more influence. It's quite a theory.
So with all this spending, how does that play out with the Fed, especially given those decent unemployment numbers?
Yeah, that's the tricky part he highlights. Unemployment came in around 4.1%, better than expected.
Which is good.
Right, but Dixon suggests a lot of that might be these new government jobs funded by this very stimulus, so it removes the economic excuse, you could say, for the Fed to cut interest rates.
Which creates conflict.
Potentially, yes. He floats the idea that the Fed chair could even be replaced to force rate cuts. But doing that, well, it risks serious inflation.
And turning the U.S. into an emerging market debt trade. What does he mean by that?
Basically, making U.S. government debt seem much riskier, more speculative, like you might see with some emerging economies. A pretty stark warning.
Okay, so the U.S. is dealing with that. But Dixon also says the rest of the world isn't just sitting around waiting for U.S. regulation on things like stablecoins.
Exactly. Things are moving fast elsewhere. He points to Russia's ruble-backed stablecoin, A7A5. Apparently, it quietly moved something like $9.3 billion in 4 months.
Wow. Bypassing sanctions.
That seems to be the idea. And then you've got accelerating corporate and institutional Bitcoin adoption.
Like who?
Well, Figma, the design software company listed in London, put about 4.5% of its cash, almost $70 million, into Bitcoin ETFs.
Okay.
And big banks, too. Deutsche Bank in Germany is planning crypto custody services by 2026. Belgium's KBC Bank now lets retail customers buy Bitcoin and Ether directly.
And we can't forget BlackRock. Their Bitcoin ETF is apparently bringing in more revenue now than their main S&P 500 fund.
That's what the reports suggest. They hold a massive amount of Bitcoin now, over 696,000 BTC. And MicroStrategy keeps buying, closing in on 600,000 BTC.
So who actually holds Bitcoin then? Dixon breaks that down.
Yeah, he estimates around 30% of all Bitcoin is held by these big known entities. You've got Satoshi's presumed stash, the major institutions like BlackRock, governments, corporations.
But critically?
Critically, he stresses the vast majority is still in self-custody, held by individuals.
And what about U.S. regulation? Any movement there?
It's mixed. Senator Lummis had that bill to exempt small crypto transactions, under $300 from tax. That got removed from this big stimulus bill.
The states are doing their own thing.
Some are. New Hampshire, Arizona, Texas. They're allowing state reserves to hold Bitcoin. Texas is even planning a $10 million buy, apparently.
Okay, let's shift to the geopolitical angle. Dixon uses this term, the proof of weapons network. What's that about?
It's his term for essentially the military-industrial complex and its associated political allies. He argues this network is currently negotiating a kind of strategic exit from the Middle East.
Exit. To be replaced by what?
By what he calls the financial-industrial complex. Think big finance, reconstruction, investment. But that requires stability. You can't easily profit from rebuilding in an active war zone.
And Israel fits into this how?
Dixon describes it quite starkly as a controlled demolition and vassalization of Israel into the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. Basically a forced realignment.
enabled by BRICS and de-dollarization.
That's his linkage, yeah. He sees the rise of alternative power blocks and moves away from the dollar as making this possible. And he points to things like Netanyahu's court case delay coinciding with a White House visit.
And that 60-day Gaza ceasefire deal.
Right, apparently on much better terms than before. Plus, reported U.S. offers to Iran about lifting sanctions if they play ball. It all fits his narrative of a managed transition.
But he also mentioned something about boycotts being effective.
Yes, and this was interesting. He highlighted Italy's biggest retail co-op, Coop Alleanza. They dropped Israeli goods, replacing them with Palestinian ones.
And the key point was why they did it.
Exactly. Dixon argues it wasn't primarily activism, it was business. Apparently, something like 66% of Italians hold anti-Israel views, so the PR win and ESG alignment, it just made financial sense for them.
So hitting the bottom line can work against that proof of weapons network.
That's his argument. It shows that economic pressure driven by profit motives can be a powerful tool for change, maybe more so than traditional activism sometimes.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, Dixon's view seems to be that the current quiet in the markets, the apparent moves towards stability. It's all deliberate.
Yes, he argues it's basically cover for deploying a new kind of financial system. Think stablecoins fully backed by government debt, maybe even tokenized political access.
And the big ETFs holding the actual Bitcoin, while most people just get exposure through them, what he calls fake exposure.
Right. So the takeaway for you listening is that Bitcoin, according to Dixon, only stays truly sovereign if you hold it yourself. Self-custody.
Because it's the neutral system outside of government control, the one they can't just print more of or easily sanction.
Precisely. It's presented as a potential way to opt out, or at least hedge, as the traditional systems get re-engineered and, well, as wars get monetized through debt.
So the final thought is, hold your own keys.
Hold your keys. Trust no proxy. And maybe remember Dixon's warning. Stability is often the story they sell you right before they pull the plug.